Anybody else? Anybody? No, just me? All right, over here. All right. Yeah. COVID is it's been an interesting season. It has been a tough season. We've had to change a lot of things in COVID. Obviously, some of our parenting has had to look different. We're talking about that through the series. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning, but also some of the things we even do as a church. And I just want to take a second right at the top here just to highlight something Alicia talked about. Last year we kicked off Trunk or Treat, and it was a great experience. Like so many families to come here and connect as a part of it. And we've had to do it differently this year. And the way we're going to do it to make sure it's safe and that people still have a good time is we're going to do a scavenger hunt, partnering with some great community organizations and businesses here in Black Diamond. But we do, like she said, we do need volunteers to help pull this off and make it an incredible event. I really think the environment that we can create here on campus when people roll up to get their packets is going to be a huge part of that experience. And so please, if you do have some time between 2 to 4, sign up. We'd love to have you here. I'll get you home before it's dark so you can do any trick-or-treating or anything else that you have planned for Halloween. As I mentioned, this morning we're going to be continuing in our parenting series, and we're going to be talking about the topic that no one likes to talk about. We're going to talk about discipline. And I get when I say that, discipline is a huge word. And it's applied differently by different people. It means different things to different people. So really, as we get going this morning, I want to kind of provide for us a working definition of discipline, hopefully to help make sure that as we talk about that we're kind of on the same page. And so here's a definition I want us to work with when it comes to discipline. Discipline is correction driven by love. I'm going to say that again. Discipline is correction driven by love, which means it's not something we do as big bad parents to our kids. It's something we do for our kids because we love our children. Now, I get the topic in itself is going to bring about all sorts of different feelings for many of us, because the reality is, even hearing that definition, many of us have not experienced that in our own life. We've not experienced correction driven by love. Matter of fact, to hear discipline and love in the same sentence for us might be like incompatible or competing ideas, but yet they don't have to be. Matter of fact, God says that these are the things that go together. We see this in the way that God interacted with his people. Matter of fact, we read these words in Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 5. The writer says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." The writer of Hebrews reminds us that God is not disciplining us because he despises us. God is disciplining us because he loves us. And I know that that's a huge shift. It's a big shift for a lot of us. A lot of us would prefer to kind of avoid conversations around discipline, which is why it was so important for me to start with that definition, that discipline is correction driven by love, which means, and this is very important, it's not correction driven by anger. When things are motivated by anger, when we lash out at our kids in discipline out of anger, that's not something that is from God. Matter of fact, Paul reminds us of these words in Ephesians chapter 4. I'm going to say it here, but we'll come back at the end. He says, in your anger, do not sin. If you're angry and those actions motivate you to do something that's sinful, don't do that. Don't be motivated out of your anger to discipline your kids. I would go so far as to say, if you're disciplining out of anger, you're not disciplining your kids. You're just angry. There's a difference between the two. And for us, and for the sake of our time together, we want to focus around this concept of it being correction driven by love. Now, what's going to be weird for us is, as we continue to talk about these things, is to realize and understand that the biblical writers have a very different view of discipline than we do. Like, they see discipline for what it could be. There's a hopefulness to their view of discipline, which is very different than how many of us view it. King Solomon would write these words in his collection of wisdom in Proverbs 19. He would say, "Discipline your children, for there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death." Again, notice here, Solomon talks about discipline in a hopeful way. He sees discipline for what it can be, not what it often is. The struggle is many of us, again, have experienced a very unhealthy form of discipline. We haven't experienced this reality in our lives. And so when it comes to our kids, because we've had such a negative experience for so many of us, when it comes to our kids, we shy away from the discipline that they need. We don't have the same hopefulness and the same peace that the biblical writers find in this word, discipline. And what I would say to us, and I think this is super important for us to understand, is our kids are going to get disciplined. Whether it's by us or by the world, they will experience discipline. The author Zig Ziglar would put it this way. He would say, a child who has not been disciplined with love by his little world will be disciplined without love by the great big world. I'm going to say that again. A child who has not been disciplined with love by his little world will be disciplined without love by the great big world. And that is so true. That we have these opportunities, we have these moments to help correct our children in love. And if we don't do it, if we don't carry out our role as parents, our children will experience that discipline someplace else. I'm actually convinced, so convinced, that we don't like discipline, that some of that informs the very styles that we choose to raise our kids. How many of you guys have ever heard the term helicopter parent? A few of you, a handful of you. How many of you guys are helicopter parents? Yeah, all right. That's first service. It was like, nope, no one wants to admit it. But here's the thing. There are some great things when it comes to helicopter parents. Now, there's some things that we can learn as helicopter parents. The helicopter parent, if you don't know what it is, they're the kind of parents who always are wanting to be there to rescue their children. They try to prevent the mistakes from happening. If you can prevent the mistake from happening, then you can prevent the natural consequences that come from those mistakes. But here's the other thing. We don't think about this part when it comes to helicopter parents. If I can prevent the mistake from happening, if I can prevent the consequences from happening, then I've also eliminated the need for me to discipline my children because we've taken that opportunity away. The problem is when we do that, when we are solely set on ensuring our kids don't experience some of the ramifications of their own decisions, they miss out on the natural consequences of their actions. And kids, they need to experience some of these consequences for themselves. They need to figure it out for themselves. And figuring it out means making mistakes. It means experiencing ramifications for those mistakes. Look at what Paul wrote to the church in Galatia. In Galatians chapter 6, he said these words, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." This here is the biblical principle of reaping and sowing. It's this idea of cause and effect. You do something, there's natural effects to that. You make a decision, there's natural consequences that come with it. And I would rather my kids experience some of the ramifications of the decisions they're making when they're little, and those decisions aren't quite as big as then when they're older. I would rather my kids experience some of the ramifications of their mistakes when they're small, rather than trying to protect them so that at some point when they're adults or older, they're experiencing those ramifications for the first time, and the impact of those decisions is far greater. What's important for us, and all of us have a little bit of the helicopter parent tendency. I do as well. Like when I see my kids doing something that might end up in them getting hurt, there's a part of me that wants to stop them because I don't want them to fall down and break an arm. I don't want them to fall down and bust open their chin. Like there's a part of all of us that want to rescue our kids. And what I would say is it's super important for us to understand that our job as parents isn't to protect our kids at all costs. That's not our job. Our job is to help our kids process the decisions before them through their faith in Jesus. That they're experiencing life, they're seeing life through the lens of their faith. Like if that's what we're doing as parents, then we're succeeding as parents. Now I get that not all of us are helicopter parents. We have different styles, and there's a lot of different styles, and I'll address this morning. But the second one I want to talk about that I think a lot of us fall into is what I'm going to call, and I'm just kind of making up this word, boundary shifting parents. You You see, as parents, most of us, we have boundaries. We have boundaries that we've kind of defined, rules, if you will. Like we've said like to our kids, like, hey, you can play in this box. Like this is your sandbox. As long as you're in this box, then you can make decisions and you experience the natural consequences of those decisions, and it's fine as long as you're in these boundaries. And boundaries are great. Boundaries are an incredible thing for our kids to have. They're also incredibly important for us to have in our own lives. Boundaries are really, really good. The problem is we have a tendency as parents to allow the boundaries, to allow the box, to allow the rules to shift and to change. And at some point we draw the boundaries for our kids to live in, and they inevitably push up against those boundaries, and so we shift the boundary. We move it, and nothing stays the same. Nothing is constant in our kids' lives. And what's important is for our kids to experience consistency when it comes to our parenting. Solomon says these words in Proverbs 29, in verse 17. He says, "Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire." Listen to the way Solomon talks about discipline. Like, how many of us think that way? Like, I'm going to discipline you, and it's going to bring me peace. And when I discipline you, it's going to bring me all the delights that I desire. Like you see the disconnect between biblical writers and their view of discipline and how we have applied it in our lives. That there's something peaceful about discipline. There's something delightful that can come of this. There are some great things in this passage. I want to read it one more time, and I want you to see what's there, and we'll talk about what's not there. "Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire." Notice that Solomon doesn't say, discipline them today, and then don't discipline them tomorrow. He doesn't say, set a boundary here for them to know where they belong or where they fit in, and then just to change those boundaries another day. There is a consistency in kind of the discipline that Solomon is talking about and that he's experienced in his own life. Now, I fully recognize, again, I have little kids at home. I fully recognize that our children will push against the boundaries. They'll push against the boundaries. It shouldn't surprise us. We're adults, and we do the same thing. When someone places a boundary on us and we don't like it, we push against it. But what we have to resist is the temptation to remove it altogether or to allow that boundary just to shift and change based on the whims or the needs of that moment. And here's the thing, I get it. Like this is where I fall. Like I'm a boundary shifting parent because life is hard. And like I work a full-time job and I come home and I'm tired and I try to volunteer and make a difference where I can. I try to be there and be present for my wife, and I try to be a good dad, but often when I get home, like I've got nothing left in the tank, and I just want to like sit down on the couch and just watch some TV or just eat dinner and just kind of just have a moment to me. And it's in those times that I feel the greatest tension for my boundaries to change, because like it will come, like screen time will be up. Our kids have a designated amount of screen time they can have every day, and one of the first things they ask every single time their screen time up is what? Can I have more time? Yes, every time. Can I have more time? And in these moments, there's a tendency for me to say, yes, just 5 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. And again, I understand, like, well, as parents, we're supposed to be filled with grace, and you know, we don't always have to win every battle, and I totally understand that, and I support that. But so often, we're shifting the boundaries. We're changing the rules. And when we shift the boundaries, what we're ultimately doing is we're teaching our kids that to follow these rules isn't necessary, because these boundaries are only temporary. And furthermore, if I just move the boundary, if I just make what was a rule no longer a rule, then my kids aren't violating that rule, and I don't have to discipline them. We have a tendency to run from healthy forms of discipline. Now, I bring up both these ideas, like the helicopter parent and the boundary shifting parent, not to say they're both inherently bad and we should push against them. There are great things in both of these styles, things that we need to learn, things that we need to bring into our lives, but we can't allow some of these styles that we have chosen, either consciously or subconsciously, to opt us out of our role as parents to provide the discipline that our kids need. Now, I'm going to talk in just a second about how we should actually go about disciplining our kids. But before that, I want to take a second to talk about one more important thing that I think is necessary to help kind of set up this conversation. When it comes to parenting and when it comes to discipline, it's critically important that we as parents are united together. And I get when I say that is easier said than done. Like my wife and I, we have a tendency to see things differently, to respond differently. Even when it comes to the correction and the discipline of our kids, we can see it differently. What's important for our kids is that they experience a united front from mom and dad. It's difficult enough to do when you have a family that is a nuclear family, but the realities of the world we live in is that some of us have gone through divorce. Some of our families don't look like what we initially imagined them to look like. And it is difficult in those situations, even more so in other situations, to create this unity as parents. Because you think to yourself, well, there's a reason why I'm not married to that person anymore. That they were unreasonable. Why should I expect them to be reasonable in this moment? And it can be very, very difficult to get onto the same page as parents, especially when it comes to discipline. And here's what I would say. I fully get it. Myself, I was raised by divorced parents. My mom and dad, they got divorced when I was in 5th grade. My parents did a good job of being unified on the big things, like on the major life issues that they were very unified. But what we all know is that life is in the details. And it was in the details that really their disunity began to show itself. And so this is what it would look like. The parenting arrangement that they had is, my mom would have me for a week, and then I would go to my dad's house for a week, and then I would go to my mom's house for a week, and we would just do that over and over again, alternating holidays. And what I found out is, when I'm at my mom's house, and if I did something wrong, she would correct me, and she would ground me, and she'd give me a ground, you're grounded for the next 2 weeks. And so the week would go by, and I would get to my dad's house, and my dad wouldn't enforce the grounding from my mom, and so I was off the hook. But then I would do something at my dad's, and he'd get upset at me, and he'd ground me for 2 weeks, so I'd be grounded. And then I'd go to my mom's house, and then my mom wouldn't enforce the discipline from my dad, and this cycle would just continue. Someone said to me after first service that you must have been a really bad kid. I wasn't grounded every week, okay? Some weeks. Probably more than I should have. Definitely more than I should have. But what I learned as a kid was this. If I was going to do something bad and I was going to get in trouble, I just needed to do it the day before I left my mom's house or the day before I left my dad's house. Because in that case, I would only be in trouble for the day and then I would be set free. I found out the weakness in their disunity. Kids will do this. Kids are incredibly smart, which is why it is important for us to be united together. Now, here's the thing. I know that's incredibly difficult. And what I would say is you're not choosing unity for the sake of your spouse. And your spouse shouldn't be choosing unity for your sake. That you are both committed to this together for your children. We have to be united in our parenting and our discipline. And it's hard in every situation, but it's a commitment we make to one another for the benefit of our children. Now, my point this morning isn't to illuminate all the ways that you, myself, that we struggle and fail as parents. My point and my hope this morning is that we can begin to really look at how we can parent and how we can discipline in a healthy way, in a godly way, in a way that is motivated by love. And I've also said over the course of this series, for everyone, even if you don't have kids or your kids are grown and out of the house, everyone can get something out of this series. And if you don't have young ones at home or you aren't currently in the thick of parenting, this might feel like an odd series that has nothing to do with you. But here's what I would say. When we talk about these next 3 ideas, they are great They're great principles to apply with kids, but they're also incredible relational conflict management ideas that benefit us in every relationship that we have in life. So there's something in this for you. So here are the three things I want us to talk about for the rest of our time together this morning. When it comes to parenting, the first thing we should do when it comes to our discipline is we should act promptly. We need to act promptly. Like, that means we don't delay the conversation. We think sometimes, well, I'll just delay the conversation. I don't want to deal with the conversation right now. I'll stuff it down. I'll bury it. But eventually, everything makes its way back up to the surface. And because we didn't act promptly and deal with it when it was actually an issue in that moment, our reaction then is far greater than it would have been if we would have just tackled it when it happened. We have a puppy at home. He's about a year now, which is amazing because that means we're well past the puppy weeks, the puppy months. How many of you guys ever had a puppy at home? Yes, you don't sleep. You know, they get into everything. They terrorize everything. They also do a really good job of pooping and peeing all over your house. And I get like someone here is like, well, that's your fault. You didn't properly, create a space for your puppy to own and where you could have managed. I get it. I make a lot of mistakes as apparently as a dog parent and a real parent. So the good news is we learned, and he's eventually potty trained now. But I remember early on in those first couple weeks, we were in the thick of potty training. And I would be doing something in the house, and I would walk downstairs. And I remember there was one time where I'm literally off in the corner of my eye, I see in the kitchen just a pile of poop sitting there on the floor. And it's not fresh. I didn't catch the dog in the act. He probably did it an hour ago, maybe 2 hours ago. Again, I'm a bad dog parent. I don't know what he was doing. Puppy has free reign to the house, apparently. So I walk in, and I see this, and I see him. And the moment I see this poop, I'm like, I have to deal with this right now. And so I walk over to the dog, and I grab the dog by the back of his neck, and I bring him over to the poo, and I stuff his nose down in the poo. And what do you think I say? Hopefully I say bad dog, right? I said, bad dog. No. And he kind of recoils, and he looks at me, and he's like, what happened? He has no idea what I'm disciplining. That was hours ago. He's like, what did I do? What is this? Why is my face stuck in this? But the thing is, that's how we parent our kids. That's how we discipline our kids. We do the same thing. Now, hopefully, no, we're not grabbing them and bringing them over to their poo and rubbing their face in it. We have different standards, but we hold our kids responsible for things they did hours ago, days ago, months ago. And it's because we didn't address the issue when the issue first came up. We stuff it down. We bottle it up, and eventually when it comes to the surface, our kids are paying for not just the mistake they made in that moment, but they're paying for the culmination of mistakes that they have made that we simply didn't address. And that's not fair, nor is it healthy for our children to experience discipline that has been delayed. So act promptly when it comes to your discipline. Now, I shared this verse from earlier. I told you I was going to bring it back up. Ephesians 4:26, it says, in your anger, remember, in your anger, do not sin. But this is the second part, and verse 27. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. And I say that because it's really important for us to cool down. It's important for us as parents to create a little space, to get to a calm, rational place before we address the issue. But we can't allow that space and getting to that place to allow us to ignore the issue. Because when we ignore the issue, what we're doing is we're allowing the sun to go down on our anger, and we're giving the devil, we're giving Satan a foothold. Now, that term foothold, what does that really mean? Essentially, what the writer is getting at is that when we allow the devil to get a foothold, essentially what we're doing is we're allowing Satan to carve out a place in our hearts. I think it's so important that when we choose not to address the issue, when we choose to just let it just live within us, we're giving Satan access in a place to our hearts. but we're also robbing our kids of the opportunity that they have in this moment to grow. And so when it comes to your parenting, my encouragement to you is to act promptly. But then number two, to expect action. And by that, I mean like immediate action. Like the first time we ask our kids to do something, we should expect action. Now, here's the thing. If you're starting your parenting journey, this is going to be a whole lot easier. Like if you've got nothing else out of this morning, please leverage this idea. Expect immediate action. For those of us who are well on our parenting journey, we've probably allowed our kids to get away with a little bit more than they should have gotten away with. This is part of the boundary shifting, because we expect action. Oh, well, they didn't do it. Okay, well, we won't address it. They learn that they don't have to respond the first time we ask. But look at what Paul writes to the church in Colossae in chapter 3. He says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." Children, obey your parents. Notice the passage doesn't say, obey your parents after they ask a few times. Paul doesn't say, children, obey your parents when they say, hey, knock it off, cut that out. No, but I'm serious this time. This is what I do all the time. I'm going, if I get to 3, anyone else count? If I get to 3, we're going to have an issue. 1, no, you put that down. 2, but don't let me get to 3. 2.5, right? Like we literally have programmed our kids to know that they're not expected to respond and do what we ask them to do the first time. And they need to learn, because that's the thing. God expects the same out of us. God expects action when God leads and calls us to do things or to step into places where he calls us to be the kind of people he's made us to be. And for those of us who aren't starting our parenting journey, this is going to take time. It's going to be a process. We're going to have to clarify the boundaries. We're going to have to apologize to our kids that we haven't upheld the standards that we expect and hold ourselves to. It's going to take a conversation, and it's not going to be easy. But I promise you, it will begin to bring the kind of joy and peace and hopefulness that the biblical writers see when it comes to discipline. This is not just for you, but it's for your kids. Because here's the reality. Someday they're going to grow up, they're going to get a job. And like any job, they're going to make mistakes. And guess what the supervisor's not going to say? When I get to 3, hey, knock that off. Don't make me say it again. It's not going to happen. Like, we're setting our kids up for failure because we're not teaching them the very thing that God expects of us. Number 3, lastly, love abundantly. This is so incredibly important. Love your kids with everything that you have. Pursue them with everything you have. And I say that because naturally in relationship, we have a tendency to pull away. That in conflict, we have a tendency to retreat. And so what happens is we discipline our kids, and it's awkward, and we've had bad experiences, and so we feel weird about it, and so we discipline our kids, and we don't like how we acted, and so we retreat, and our kids feel like the separation in our relationship, and so they retreat, and eventually what happens is there's a gap that's formed in our relationship, and if we don't address it, if we don't choose to love them abundantly, if we don't choose to pursue them, there's a potentiality for that gap to become a chasm. And that's how we begin to lose our kids. That's how we begin to step away and to find the separation in them that many of us, when we're older, we can regret. We choose to pursue our kids. We love them with all that we have. We choose to lean in, to share our heart, to be gracious with hugs. And like my dad used to say this all the time when I was growing up. When he would punish me, he would say, "This hurts me more than you." Parents get that. Kids don't. But don't allow that to create a separation in your life. The mistakes your kids make, they don't change the way that you feel about them. Just like the mistakes we make, don't change the way that God feels about us. You see, God loves us with all of his heart. God chose to love with abundance when it comes to us. Matter of fact, so much so that he chose to send his son Jesus to earth for us. Matter of fact, in the most famous passage in all the Bible, we read these words, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." And that there might be the single most important thing that you need to hear this morning. That Jesus died for you. That Jesus gave his life for you. That he loves you so much that he would pursue you even if it cost him everything. That's the good news of the gospel. And if you're someone here this morning who needed to hear that, then God had you here for that reason. And if you would love to talk to someone about it, after the service, you can find me up front here, or if you're online, our host will drop in that chat opportunity for you to talk right now. See, God models what abundant love looks like. And when we do that same thing for our kids, they not only receive the love that they so desperately need, but they also get a glimpse into the love of God being displayed through us. We've said this throughout the parenting series. More is caught than it is taught. And so as we wrap up this morning, I hope that you would walk away understanding that discipline can be good. That discipline can display love. That discipline is not something we do to our kids. It's something we do for them. It's correction that is driven, that is motivated by our heart's desire to love our children and to see them become the individual that God has made them to be. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for the time that we have together. And I thank you for the hopefulness that we find in your word, a very different perspective of what discipline can look like, God. And I know even for myself, I haven't always viewed it that way. God, I haven't always seen discipline as something that I've done for my kids to help them grow into your son's likeness. God, I pray that you would help me, you would help us step into that reality. You'd help us embrace the discomfort of discipline and to leverage some of these ideas that help us model love and action in the same way that you did. God, we don't do this so that our kids get bitter. We do it so they get better. And so they grow to be more and more like you as we ourselves submit our lives every day to become more and more like you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.